I do want to make that caveat, right? That mental illness does not equate being violent, or it does not make somebody violent because they have a mental illness. But also bear in mind that this child was a witness to violence.
Right.
So he was living in a home where there was violence. So him seeing violence was his normal. So it may not have been whatever mental illness that, like, he could have been suicidal, he could have been depressed, he could have been anxious, he could have been a host of things. And those things don't inherit.
Hey guys, so authentic marriage is here, So obviously everybody has heard about the school shooting that happened at Apalachee High School, and we wanted to kind of issue just a response video to what happened, talk a little bit about the details of what went wrong in that really, really unfortunate situation, and then just kind of tie it to some larger points about family, marriage, and mental health.
Yeah. I think for us, one of the things that like really was disturbing was the fact that this school shooting happened too close to home, right? Like the school is less than an hour from where we live, and it it's really, really sad and unfortunate that this is the reality that so many of us as parents and teachers and everybody is living with. And it's something that, like, we don't have to live with this, right? Like, this doesn't really have to be our reality, and yet it is. And so we wanted to kind of talk about the role that mental health plays in this story and in this situation.
Right. So, before we get to that, we spent a little bit of time just kind of looking into the situation, researching what happened there. And the more we read and more we found out, the more we're just like, oh my God, like this was such a very sad situation before the shooting even happened. And it helps to explain a little bit as to how this could have happened in the first place. And when we look into the shooter's background, so Colt, the young man who did the shooting at the school, what you see is a lot of brokenness. There was a lot of brokenness that was happening within him, but especially in the environment that he was in, right?
A lot of trauma.
There was a lot of trauma. There is a lot of trauma that was going on. It sounds like it had been going on for quite some time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, one of the big things that we saw was just that the home was kind of falling apart, right? So I think some people may have already known that the FBI had been called into the home last year, May, because of potential threats of shootings that were made online. And, recently they did their due diligence. They sounded like they couldn't make any charges. And so the situation was kind of left on its own. But there was so much more going on than just this troubled kid making these threats. So we also found out that in that house, there had been a lot of conflict going on. The house was kind of falling apart. They had been evicted from where they were living, right? And so you have loss of housing happening. And so they had to move out from the location that they were in a few months prior to that and move into somewhere else. And then there was stuff going on with the mom. So mom apparently had some drug issues, had been arrested, charged, convicted on drug-related crimes, meth, fentanyl, some really scary big drugs that were involved there. And there were some other legal charges that she also faced as well outside of that incident. So it just shows you, like, man, like, mom was not doing okay.
Mom was convicted of family violence.
Right.
And so she wasn't allowed to have any contact with the husband. And that alone tells you the amount of chaos that was in the home for a woman to be convicted of essentially domestic violence.
Right.
And your child is a witness to this domestic violence. Your child is a witness to the drug highs that are happening, the explosiveness that might be coming out as a result of the drugs that she's taking, the just constant emotional instability. Probably doesn't know which mother he's going to get on which day.
Exactly.
And any child living in a home like that is a child that's living in trauma.
Exactly. And that's it, right? And so a lot of upheaval that's going on. And so Apparently his grandmother, the shooter's grandmother, was very, very concerned about his mental health. And it sounds like a week before the shooting, she had traveled to go see the counselor, one of the counselors at the school that he was at, to talk to the counselor to say, hey, like, we need to get him some help. He's really struggling. And I think counseling was supposed to get started. We don't know if it did or not. But just to tell you that there were people who were seeing what was going on and were very alarmed, very concerned. And obviously no one could have predicted what happened. Yeah. And it's not about that. It's just about the fact that this kid was not doing well.
He was not okay.
He was not okay. And, we don't want to say, hey, if somebody has mental health issues, it automatically means they're going to be a danger to themselves or others. It just means that when there's these kinds of things going on, you don't know what could happen. And really, really bad things can happen, just like what we've seen, where this young man did something very heinous and hurt a lot of people. But clearly he had been struggling for a while and was in an environment that just was not good for him.
Yeah. And I do want to make that caveat, right? That mental illness does not equate being violent, or it does not make somebody violent because they have a mental illness, but also bear in mind that this child was a witness to violence. Right. So he was living in a home where there was violence. So him seeing violence was his normal. Mm-hmm. So it may not have been whatever mental illness that, like, he could have been suicidal, he could have been depressed, he could have been anxious, he could have been a host of things. And those things don't inherently make you violent, like being depressed or having anxiety, right? Like that doesn't equate I'm going to be violent, right? But when you live in especially a family dynamic that is so so much chaos, I imagine for the mother to have been charged with domestic violence, because you don't really often hear that, right? Like you don't really hear of women being charged with domestic violence. It then tells you the extent to which violence was a part of his life. Mm-hmm. And violence was something that he saw. And violence was something that he witnessed on probably a very regular enough basis for her to be convicted. Mm-hmm. And so, I would also just like to add that caveat that having a history of or witnessing violence, you are likely to repeat that. So if you are a child that grew up in a home and you witness a parent or both parents being abusive to each other, even if they were not abusive to you, then it is more likely than not that you will end up with a partner that is abusive to you.
Right.
Because you're going to repeat what it is that you see.
Right.
And I think that this is the importance of us really not only paying attention to our children's mental health, but also paying attention to our health, our relationship health. Like, how healthy are we as a couple? Because as a couple, we provide the foundation for their mental health.
Exactly.
Right? Like we provide the foundation for their well-being, and we are the ones that then is like, we're like the fertilizer that then helps them to grow up to be, law-abiding and productive citizens of society. And so if things are wrong in our relationship, things are wrong with our own mental health, our children are going to be impacted.
Exactly. And I think that's so important because, I recently saw an article that's kind of talking about, what are the biggest predictors for like child mental health well-being is specifically how well the mom is doing. So if the mom is stressed and anxious, or if the mom just seems to be bothered and upset about situations going on in her life, those things are going to affect your kids significantly. Yeah. So, if your marriage is not doing the way it needs to be doing, or if you are just really struggling with your own mental health, that is going to pour into your child, and it's not even something you're going to consciously do. Mm-hmm. A lot of this is that kids are picked up from their environment. They're very, very sensitive to their environment, especially their home environment. And so they just know that something isn't right. And so even in a situation, if you talk about the violent situation of being exposed to it, even let's say, you grew up in a situation like that, but you've never been violent. That's not something that you've done, right? Because we know most people who grew up in those environments don't necessarily act it out. But what you have learned is unhealthy ways of dealing with things, and you have not learned the healthy
Yeah.
way of actually, like, how do I engage conflict? A lot of the times when people are afraid of engaging violence because of what they've seen growing up, they then avoid violence, which means they also avoid conflict as well, because the conflict is like, well, conflict could lead to violence, so I'm not going to engage the conflict. I'm just going to walk away, right? And yes, okay, you haven't had a violent situation, but now you don't know how to actually engage conflict healthily, and you don't know how to engage your partner healthily, because conflict is going to inevitably arise at home. That's part of life, is about how do you deal with it. And so, for this poor young man, he was in a situation that he didn't ask for, right? And he acted out in obviously one of the most horrible ways he could think of. But we do know that there was just a lot of bad things that are happening there. And so, we may not be in those extreme environments. You may say to yourself, well, what does this have to do with me or my family or whatever? Well, the point is that, whether or not we are in a healthy environment or not, no matter what you do, what's going on between you and your spouse is going to affect your family and the culture of the home that you have. That's the larger point. Like, you want to set up a good culture for your home. A lot of people are very invested in their kids doing well, and they invest a lot of time and energy and money into them, right? But the biggest investment you can do in your kids or make in your kids is to make sure that you and your spouse are doing okay.
And I think that's what people don't think about, is that especially if you are wanting to make your kid probably even have a better life than you grew up with, there's this tendency to end up like overindulging your children, having them in every sporting activity or every extracurricular activity, giving them all of these wonderful things. And then that inherently stresses out the family system, because when we have children in multiple sports that are 5 days a week, and we're traveling on the weekends to do all these things, it leaves us very little time, one, for me to be with me and for me to check in with myself, for me to have the time that I need for myself, for my own mental health. But it leaves probably zero time for us to connect and for us to build our relationship. And I think what parents end up doing, unfortunately, is that they end up sacrificing their relationships in order to help their children be successful at a sport or some type of extracurricular activity, thinking that you're giving your child the best. But you are not giving your child the best if your relationship is not given the best.
Exactly. And I recently saw the Surgeon General's office. So that's the head doctor in the federal government of America, basically. They put out a release recently that said that, parental stress was a urgent mental health situation going on in America.
Wow.
Like an urgent situation.
Like a mental health crisis.
Crisis, essentially. So we've talked a lot about how young people are dealing with mental health crises.
Yeah.
That what they're saying is that the level of stress that most people in America, like they did research on it to show like, hey, most people say like they're dealing with crushing levels of stress.
That's crazy.
Most parents, crushing levels of stress. Basically in the modern America, how we do business as a family is stressing people to the point of their absolute limits. And I do think a part of that is that we are not, obviously there's a lot of things. There's economic stresses that people are dealing with. There's just like this time crunches people are dealing with, right? The lack of support people have because we live in these homes where they're separated from our families. So it's just us, no extended family around for most people. So you don't have a lot of stress, right? A lot of support rather. But what ends up happening, I think also, is that we also put ourselves in situations by, as what Cara was saying, is that you're investing so much time and energy into your kids, because we see it. America is a child-centered society, so we see it all the time that this is what's going on, and people are stretching themselves to give their kids the best, right? Not realizing that, okay, well, the best thing I can do first and foremost is make sure that I'm okay, our marriage is okay, because our kids draw their emotional energy from the home. And even if a kid is doing very well academically, even if they're doing very well from a sporting standpoint, I can say as a child psychiatrist, because I see these kids in my office, even when those things seem to be going great, a lot of those kids are really struggling with their mental health. And I've seen situations where kids have graduated top of their class in high school, full scholarship, and they're in my office with suicidal thoughts or even tried to kill themselves because their mental health wasn't where it needed to be. And a part of it was that there was so much emphasis on all of this performance and doing well and whatever, that there wasn't enough space made in the home for the mental health of the body.
Yeah. And so the take home point here today is basically invest in your marriage.
Exactly.
Right? Invest in your marriage as part of ensuring that your children have the best opportunity to thrive emotionally, mentally, and spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is one of the best gifts that you can give to your children is a happy home.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so there's a lot of ills in society that comes as a result of us not being okay as a couple. And this is one of the things that we could actually prevent. Right? Like we could actually safeguard our children by safeguarding our relationship and safeguarding our marriage. So guys, make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and send us your questions that you would like us to answer. And until next time.
Bye, guys.